Nightmare on Elm Street 2: Freddy's Revenge was released in 1985, directed by Jack Sholder and written by David Chaskin, and starring Mark Patton, Kim Myers, and Robert Englund yet again as Freddy Krueger. The film follows Jesse Walsh, a teenager who begins having reoccurring nightmares about Freddy Krueger after moving into the former home of Nancy Thompson from the first film. This is one of the more interesting films and riskier films in the franchise. This is still so early in the mythos of Freddy Krueger, so the idea of only containing Freddy within a dream hadn't quite been established yet. And in a lot of ways, I appreciate the risk-taking and trying something a bit different with the whole possession angle. But I do feel that there are some issues when it comes to having Freddy come out of the dream world into reality. But before we go any further, I'd like to go through my pros and cons. When it comes to the pros, I really like the cast in this film. Mark Patton is a certified scream queen, and I love the relationship between him and Kim Myers. They honestly seem like two besties getting ready to go to the mall. And speaking of Kim Myers as Lisa, I love her in this film. She has that badass final girl aura around her. And of course, Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger is incredible. He's always fantastic in the role of Freddy. And to think that the studio thought they could replace him is beyond me. Thankfully, the producers realized their mistake and brought back Robert Englund. I also like that the film maintains its darker tone. Freddy isn't making jokes or one-liners, he's still very scary. And while there's absolutely camp in this film, I feel those darker moments with Freddy offset the camp really well. And speaking of camp, there are some wonderfully campy scenes, like the exploding parakeet, or Jesse's dancing in his bedroom, closing a drawer with his booty, and a little hip thrust for good measure. But I think the following clip really illustrates how fantastic the camp is, and why this is considered one of the gayest horror films ever made.
Something is trying to get inside my body.
Yeah, and she's female and she's waiting for you in the cabana. And you want to sleep with me.
I like most of the practical effects in this film, specifically the possession scene, and this was a scene that creeped me out as a little kid. As for the negatives, I feel that there's also some pretty bad practical effects. The first one to spring to mind is the dogs with the human faces on them. It literally looks like a random cheap mask from a Halloween store. And I also felt that the kills were pretty underwhelming, and sometimes even hilarious. Grady's kill in particular was pretty underwhelming, with how that entire scene was built up with Freddy coming out of Jesse's body to ultimately kill Grady in a not so creative way was pretty disappointing. Coach Snyder's death is ridiculous and hilarious. He's literally getting pelted with his own balls and then proceeds to get his ass slapped with some towels. And a part of me loves it and a part of me says, what the fuck? I also wasn't the biggest fan of the score. I forgot to mention in my review for Nightmare on Elm Street that I love that score and it's iconic. Without the score in this film, it feels disjointed from the rest of the franchise. But the biggest issue I have with this film is that Freddy is able to leave the dream world and come into reality, and then proceeds to attack these teenagers at a pool party. I could let it slide a lot more when it's a one-on-one type of confrontation, like with Grady, but when it's this big group of teenagers that could easily overpower Freddy, I'm not scared during this scene. I'm more so kind of bored. Everything up until this point I feel is a lot more effective. Now that's not to say that I don't like this movie, I just feel that it's a bit disjointed and it's having a bit of an identity crisis. So with all that said, I'm going to give A Nightmare on Elm Street 2: Freddy's Revenge an add to the collection. While it's not my favorite in the franchise, I do appreciate a lot of the ideas and the different direction that this film took. It doesn't always work, but I feel like it works more than it doesn't. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to support the channel even more, check out my Patreon page. Link is down in the description below. Thank you so much for coming by, and I'll see you guys on the next video.
You've got the body. I I've got the brain.